For most of my career, I deliberately kept myself invisible, not because I was shy, not because I lacked the confidence in my work. I knew my contracts, I knew my process. I could walk a client through an escrow with precision and leave them fully informed. But I made a very specific calculation early on in my career that kept me hidden behind the professional version of me for years. And my calculation was this: if a client didn't know me as a person, then when a client didn't choose me, I could blame my skills. I could work on my skills, I could improve them, I could refine them, and I could develop them. That was a problem I could solve. But if a client did know me, the real me, not just the professional realtor, then rejection came as something entirely different. Not a skills gap, a judgment about who I was as a person, and I didn't know how to recover from that. So I stayed one-dimensional, all business, all the time. And I'll tell you what that cost me. The relationships that I built over those years were very much one-sided. I knew my clients deeply, their fears, their timelines, their family situations, what this home meant for their life, and they just knew me as the agent that closed their deals. Those transactions closed, and then there was radio silence because there was nothing personal on my side of the relationship to sustain anything past the paperwork. There was no real connection, no sense of who I was beyond the surface I had provided. The referrals I did not receive during those years were not lost because I did poor work. They were lost because the people that I served, they didn't feel they knew me well enough to put their name next to mine. You don't really ever truly recommend somebody passionately if you've only ever experienced them in a professional function. And quite frankly, I wasn't available to be known. Invisibility felt safe to me. And here's what I eventually understood about that. When I was working, I didn't experience myself as a real person. I experienced myself as the realtor, one-dimensional. The role was the identity, and the identity was the role. And when you're fused that completely with your profession, with your professional self, there's no separate person to be seen. Visibility becomes performance by default because there's nothing authentic available to express. So this wasn't a confidence problem, this was a nervous system response to a specific kind of vulnerability that visibility requires. When your worth as a person is tied to your production, which is what happens in an industry that measures everything by closing count, being seen as a person is genuinely dangerous. Because if a client fully sees you and doesn't choose you, the nervous system does not experience that as professional disappointment, it experiences it as personal rejection. That protection was intelligence, and it was costing me everything it was designed to protect. And so what shifted for me? The first time I remember seeing that shift was when I posted my first vulnerable video on YouTube about my struggles in real estate. It was raw, it was true, nothing like the polished professional content that I had told myself a serious agent was supposed to produce. But it didn't start there. I started with a text, writing my truth where my face wasn't visible, where the words could land without me having to watch anybody receive them, and then audio, and then finally onto the screen. Each step closer to being seen, not because I was more confident, but because I was more willing to be known. And so what I discovered was that the truth was more compelling than any performance had ever been. Not because vulnerability is strategy, but because people recognize the honesty in their body before their mind was able to process it. When I stopped filtering myself through what I thought a successful agent should look like, something in the communication became direct in a way that a polished professionalism never quite managed. Visibility is one of the 4 V's I teach inside my program, Licensed and Aligned, along with voice, vision, and values. Because what I learned is that your brand is not something that you construct. It's something that becomes visible as you stop covering it up. If any of what I have described today sounds remotely familiar, the one-dimensional presence, the professional mask, the relationships that stay transactional, the link to Licensed and Aligned is in the description below. You don't need to be louder to be seen. You just need to stop hiding the person behind the profession.